Hello everyone. For the 3 people who end up watching this video, I welcome you. This is Erik, the Asian movie enthusiast. So we will now continue our exploration of Asian horror. And tonight we are going to finish the 1960s. Now you'll remember in our last video that we observed that the late 1960s was a very active set of years for the Asian horror movie industry, especially Japanese horror. So active, in fact, that the 15 movies that we will cover in this video were released over a period of only 2 years, 1968 and 1969. So let's get started. Our first movie tonight is Yokai Monsters 1, Spook Warfare, a Japanese horror comedy, I guess you could call it, from 1968. Now, Yokai Monsters is actually a trilogy of movies, all of which we will be discussing in this Asian horror movie project. So the plot of the first film goes like this. After a vampire demon kills and impersonates a lord, it's up to the local yokai, weird, friendly monster ghost hybrids, to stop him. Now, I provided a very brief introduction to Yokai Monsters in a prior video when I reviewed the ghost story of the 7 Wonders of Hansho from 1957. Now, these yokai monsters, the film specifically, give the yokai themselves a lot more screen time than Hansho did, and that's a positive. Now, a number of popular yokai from Japanese folklore show up in this Yokai Monsters film. The Karakasa Tsukumogami, which is the umbrella with eyes and a long tongue. So you have an umbrella hopping around, it's got eyeballs on it, and it has a long tongue sticking out. You have a Rokuro Kubi, who is a sexy girl with a really long neck. She's my personal favorite, although the umbrella's pretty hilarious. They're kind of a tie for me. You have the Futakuchi Onna, who is a ghost girl with an extra face on the back of her head, and then a turtle sprite, and lots of others. There's a nice variety here. Now, this film is on the family-friendly side, so it's almost like a film for the whole family, but that doesn't mean it's a bad movie. In fact, it's pretty good. I like this one. It's fun watching. The yokai in this movie are almost like likable apparitions. They're friendly to the protagonists in this film. So they're not the evil monsters, so to speak. So it's a period film, and it's fun watching them interact with the protagonists and stick it to the bad guys as necessary. Now, the special effects are a mixed bag, but some of them are surprisingly cool. And there's actually some creepy atmosphere at times. So this is a nicely balanced film. You have the family-friendly stuff, you have some spooky stuff, some good humor, interesting characters. I recommend this. So the DVD availability on Yokai Monsters, which a lot of people don't know about this movie, so you would assume that it's obscure, but it's widely available on DVD. You can get it on Amazon. I rented it on Netflix not too long ago. So check that one out. And now we move on to the sequel to Yokai Monsters. That's Yokai Monsters 2, 100 Monsters, from 1968, the same year. And of course, it's a Japanese horror film. This one's less of a comedy, more of a horror drama hybrid. So it's nice to see that they mixed it up here, didn't just redo the same thing. Now in this one, a greedy landowner attempts to demolish a shrine to build a brothel. Come on, man. You gotta take this guy down. So the local yokai monsters take action, of course. So again, this is very different from the original film. The monsters receive a lot less screen time and actually do not engage in dialogue like the first film. So this kind of dehumanizes them, but it makes their appearances more creepy and haunting. With the exception of the umbrella ghost yokai, who is always just cute. Now, the human conflicts are properly developed, with very dislikable antagonists, and there are some cool horror sequences to enjoy. The Rokuro Kubi, again, the sexy girl with the really long neck, gets a great scene, and the finale is pretty cool. I recommend this as well. Now, DVD availability, just like the first film, is widely available. So you can do, this makes a really nice double feature. You know, a really nice double feature for an evening. Now we will review the third and final entry of this trilogy a little bit later in this video because it was released in 1969. And of course, if you haven't guessed yet, I want to cover Asian horror in a very disciplined, chronological manner. So we're going to finish 1968 first, and then we'll move on to 1969. So the next horror film that we're going to discuss from 1968 is a Japanese horror film called Vengeance Demon. After his sister is raped by villagers, a man seeks vengeance by brutally killing the townsfolk. So this is a film by Koji Wakamatsu, the same director that we covered previously with the film Violated Angels from 1967. Now, Vengeance Demon is surprisingly more bloody and violent than Violated Angels was. So the protagonist brutally murders some of the women. This isn't a spoiler, I'm just giving you an idea of the type of violence that's in this movie, by slicing them in the vagina with a samurai sword. So that's the type of thing you're getting here. Now, if you're into this kind of thing, this is a very briskly paced and engaging film. It's well directed, because remember, Koji Wakamatsu isn't some schlock director off the street. This guy's got some serious talent behind the camera. So you get a quality to this. Even though it's almost like exploitative, you get a quality direction here behind the camera. So if you like that type of macabre content, this is one to put on your radar. But some people like the nastier side of horror. This will be a movie for you. And remember, Wakamatsu is a highly acclaimed, proficient director. Now, Vengeance Demon, if you were not interested in this, you're kind of in luck because it's difficult to find. So just, if you're into that type of film, write it down in your to-see list and look out for it when it pops up again in the future. Now, next on our list here is a film called The Brides of Blood, a film from 1968, but it's from the Philippines. Now, this is actually the first film in the Blood Island trilogy, and is also the most entertaining. Now, the other two films in this trilogy are The Mad Doctor of Blood Island from 1969 and Beast of Blood from 1971, all of which are directed by a man named Eddie Romero, and all of which we will be exploring in this playlist. So in this film, while visiting a tropical island for scientific investigation, a team of researchers have to contend with man-eating plants and animals, mutations caused by radioactivity. So there's a satisfying quantity of amusing horror here, and I use the term amusing for a reason. Now, the Beastman costume, I think, is just flat out hilarious. So it helps to be a fan of cult cinema going into this one. I also like the violent trees. There's some violent trees thrown in. Now, this film, as you may have guessed, is a much maligned film on the internet, but I still think it's quite fun for fans of B-movie type films. I like this one. Now, The Brides of Blood are widely available. The DVD is widely available on DVD. Yeah, if Brides of Blood were widely available, I'm not sure I would purchase them, but the DVD is widely available. So, not a high priority item, but if you like that type of thing, feel free. The next film on our list. Now, this one has a cult following to it. It's called Living Skeleton. We're back to Japan. Japanese horror film, 1968. Now, this is directed by a man named Hiroshi Matsuno, who only has one director credit on IMDb, but I've heard he directed a few other non-horror movies. So this could be his only horror film. And is it any good? Well, let's take a look here. Now, a murder victim from a boat cruise hijacking returns from the grave and takes vengeance on the robbers, but a young woman in a seaside town who's tormented by her twin sister's death is impacted by these horrific events. Don't worry about that. That's my phone. I should have turned it off. So the story is a bit confusing at times, okay? Especially in terms of remembering the characters who are shown for mere seconds during a pivotal opening scene. But after a while, it becomes obvious that the bad guys are the ones getting knocked off throughout the film. Because at first you're like, are these ghouls attacking innocent people or the bad guys? And it's not a spoiler, but, just to give you a heads up, it's the bad guys that are getting taken out here. So this film has a nice horror foundation. The death scenes have a variety, and some are actually really cool. Fog is used moderately. Some people on the internet have said that this is just loaded with fog. It really isn't. There is fog that's used moderately, but it's not like, this isn't like the Silent Hill video games here, you know what I mean? Now, there's also plenty of skeletons to enjoy, though. There are enough skeletons to warrant the title, Living Skeleton. Now, one of the biggest positives of this film is that it was shot very nicely in black and white, which adds to the experience. So this film is a pretty obscure one that has impressed the few who have seen it. And you can actually see it too, because not too long ago, it did get a release. Now, it's available on Hulu, streaming, but Criterion did release Living Skeleton as part of their Eclipse Series 37, when horror came to Shochiku. Feel free to check that one out. It's a cool movie, and it's different. I like it. Now, we just finished a patch of some really interesting films, most of which are widely available. Now, unfortunately, our next little batch of films are not easy to find. But stay with me, because you may want to include these on your to-watch list, if you can, and to look out for them in the future. So we come now to Dismembered Ghost, Japanese horror film from 1968. Now, a murder leads to revenge from the grave. So it's, pretty basic plot. This is similar in some ways to Love Foolery Case for a Severed Head, which we covered previously. Because it has quite a bit of sensuality and themes of infidelity and betrayal to it. Now, there is a bloody dismemberment scene, which, again, warrants the title for the film, Dismembered Ghost. The dismemberment scene involves a corpse, actually, and there are a number of hauntings by ghostly body parts. The ending, I thought, was a little abrupt, but overall it's a pretty good film. Not a high priority item, but if you see it somewhere, check it out. Now, I did watch this, actually, without subtitles. You might be forced to do the same. The DVD availability on this is not good. I haven't been able to find a DVD. Again, I probably saw it on YouTube at some point, but I couldn't find it when I looked for it recently. The next one is called The Joys of Torture. 1968 again. We haven't escaped from 1968 yet. This is a Japanese horror anthology film, and I would actually classify this as an exploitation film. Some of the films we've covered previously have had exploitative elements, but this one in my notes, I've actually identified as exploitation, which to me means that like the violence and or the sexual content overpowers the story. But does that mean that it's a bad film and not enjoyable? Well, let's see here. So this film consists of 3 short stories set during the Shogun era. Now, the first story, a woman is forced to have sex with men in order to pay for her brother's medical costs, and that leads to some bad stuff. The second story is about a monastery that is invaded with lust. The third story is about a morbid tattoo artist who uses torture as an inspiration for his craft. So, this film will undoubtedly be compared with its notorious successor, which was Shogun's Sadism. Say that 5 times real fast. From 1976, which we will get to later on in this playlist. And while The Joys of Torture takes more time to set up its dramatic elements than its notorious successor does, there is still plenty of torture and murder to enjoy here if you're into that type of thing. It basically has a nice variety of violence to it, which makes it very engaging for fans of nasty, violent horror films. I did view it without subtitles, but it's so violent and focuses on the violence so much, you really don't need too much in terms of subtitles to figure out what's going on here. Now, already we're seeing to see different trends in Japanese horror. We're starting to get more into like nasty, violent movies. In the samurai movies are still there. The samurai horror movies are still there. But you're seeing a mix here now. So the joys of torture is difficult to find. Again, look out for it, though, because I did enjoy this movie. I enjoyed it more than Dismembered Ghost. So I would actually recommend this more strongly than Dismembered Ghost. Now, we now make the transition from nasty to classy. This is one of my favorite Asian horror films before 1970, and that is Ghost Story of the Snow Witch. Still 1968. It's a Japanese horror romance hybrid. There's some romance infused into this one. Now, it's basically the same plot as the short film that we covered in Quiden, The Woman in the Snow. But I like this version more. So obviously a wood sculptor witnesses the death of his master by a snow witch and is sworn to secrecy for the rest of his life. So the most striking aspects of this film are the visuals, which are just outstanding. I mean, everyone rightfully compliments the visuals in Quiden, but I think this film is just as beautiful and effective in using atmospheric, icy imagery. The theme is just, it tends to force the filmmaker to use like ice and snow, almost like the environment is a character in and of itself, because it's part of the Snow Witch's character. And the deadly supernatural abilities of this Snow Witch are showcased a handful of times with a gorgeous mix of like snow and ice incorporated into the scenes. So it's really good stuff. The special effects in this, I think, are surprisingly good, and they've aged really well. The characters and the human conflicts are also convincingly developed. They accentuate the horror elements and actually provide reasoning behind the decision-making near the end. As an added bonus, there's a good romantic element that's bittersweet. So, again, I think this is superior to the short and Quiden, and I highly recommend this. Now, unfortunately, it's difficult to find. But I have seen some DVDs floating around at times on eBay or iOffer. So look out for it. Now the next film, we stick with Japanese horror again. And this film is also very good. I don't like it quite as much as Ghost Story of the Snow Witch, but this one's very good. And that is called The Ghost Cat Cursed Pond, also known as Bakeneko, a Vengeful Spirit. Again, 1968, Japanese horror. So, like many of these Japanese horror films that we've seen that are set during samurai times, the scriptwriter uses a despicable lord or villain that earns the viewer's ire. You really want to see these guys get taken down. And that's true for a lot of the other films that we've covered already. So the human conflicts here are very engaging early on, and they set up like a boatload of horror-themed deaths that occurred during the later half of the film, many of which use deception that's similar to the ghost story of Kasane Swamp that we previously covered. So you see a lot of these, Japanese period horror films at this time, they mirror each other a lot. There's some differences at times, but you begin to see, some repetition here, but the execution here is so good I can forgive it. So there are also plenty of spooky environments, like a creepy forest, a foggy marsh, and a graveyard to enjoy. There are a few good sword fights that employ effective camera work. This is a solid entry to a fairly popular subgenre, as we've seen. DVD availability. Again, unfortunately, it's difficult to find. But I think I saw it on YouTube or Hulu at one point. So keep looking out for it. Now, our last few films have been not easy to acquire, but we finally move on to 1969 here, and the first film from that year that we're covering is a very good film that's highly available. So stick with me on this. And that film is Blind Beast from 1969, baby. This is a good one. A Japanese, almost horror thriller drama hybrid. Now in this one, a blind sculptor in search of the perfect female body kidnaps a beautiful model and takes her back to his home. This was directed by Yasuzo Masumura, another very good Japanese director that should be more well known in the West due to the solid overall quality of his films. Now, from the premise, you might think this is a real nasty movie like Joys of Torture, but it isn't. This movie is actually pretty classy. Now, it has an interesting story, and the character interaction is intriguing because the model who's kidnapped attempts to, manipulate the sculptor and his mother to find an escape. So there are some fairly, near the end of the movie, I thought that there were some fairly abrupt plot developments, but they do follow a logical progression. Overall, this is a nicely scripted film, I think. Now, the house, I don't even know if you call it a house. It's more like a lair, or like a big artist studio. It includes bizarre giant statues of body parts, like this blind sculptor somehow figured out what body parts look like from the feel of them, and he sculpted these huge, weird, creepy statues. Just not even a full body, just like body parts. It's pretty good stuff. It's creepy, and it's a very cool setting that's used for almost the entire film. There are some erotic themes, but there are actually no sex scenes in the film that are actually shown on screen. The characters are pretty good, and the finale is a bit odd but disturbing. So, this film actually has a very good reputation, and I think rightfully so. Blind Beast is probably the most highly acclaimed film we're going to talk about in this particular video. So, I would say that it's a must-see. I really do. A lot of people really like this movie. Check it out. And as I said before, the DVD availability is highly available. And you can also find it, I actually saw it on YouTube, posted in its entirety with good English subtitles. Just a few days ago I was checking its availability. So there's a lot of different ways to see Blind Beast. So here we finally come to the third installment of the Yokai Monsters trilogy. This installment is called Along with Ghosts from 1969. And this one, again, doesn't have a lot of comedy in it like the first film. It's more of a horror drama. But is it as good as the first two films in the franchise? Well, let's see here. A little girl finds an important document and is chased by a local criminal's goons, which provokes the yokai to take action. Now, the final film in this trilogy is unfortunately the weakest of the bunch. The Yokai Monsters themselves only show up for maybe a few minutes, and the human conflict just isn't enough to drive the film. So you get a drop in the yokai appearances, and what they replace it with just isn't very good. The horror sequences, they just feel like feeble rehashes of the second film in this trilogy. It's hard to recommend this installment because it's simply not very entertaining. Real shame too, because the first two films are good. If you watch both of those and you enjoy them, you may want to check this one out, because maybe you'll disagree with me on it. Just go in with lowered expectations. I still say the first two films are a very nice double feature. And like the first two films, the DVD availability is wide, so you can find the whole trilogy very easily. Now, next film here is another one that's fairly popular. Not as popular as Blind Beast, or as acclaimed as Blind Beast, but it's one of the more popular ones we're going to cover tonight. And that is the Horrors of Malformed Men from 1969. It's a Japanese horror drama. Now, this is an odd film from director Teruo Ishii, who is the director of The Joys of Torture. Now, this film doesn't get nearly as nasty as that film. And it's basically about a medical student who's searching for his father, but discovers a deranged scientist on a remote island whose experiments combine humans and animals to produce freakish creatures. Now, after hearing that storyline, it might remind you of the island of Dr. Moreau, right? And that's basically what this film is like. It's an effective blend of mystery and strangeness that ends up being a memorable experience, if only for its bizarre characters. I mean, it's just bizarre stuff. A A few of the final shots I thought were particularly imaginative. The ending provides a very detailed explanation, too, that covers almost all of the questions that were previously proposed throughout the film. You don't see that very much in Japanese horror. They like to leave some things open-ended, but if you like your Asian horror films with a lot of explanations nailed down by the end, you'll enjoy that aspect of this one. And like I said, the violence is on the tame side. This isn't another Joys of Torture here, but there is some nudity. Just fair warning. There are a few scenes that feel a little bit goofy, but it's an awkward, creepy goofiness, so it works. Now, the Horrors of Malformed Men is widely available on DVD. Feel free to check that one out. Next film we're covering is The Mad Doctor of Blood Island from 1969. It's a Filipino horror film. Now, again, this is the second film in the Blood Island trilogy. I love it. When I say blood, when I talk about the Blood Island trilogy, you gotta add an accent. It's like, blood. You know, like the old school vampires. Blood. The Blood Island trilogy. Unfortunately, The Mad Doctor of Blood Island is the least entertaining in the entire trilogy. So a doctor travels to a tropical island. It seems to be a theme lately, doesn't it? Tropical island settings, where a mad doctor has created a zombie monster. Unfortunately, it's forgettable B-movie fluff we're talking about here. It has pacing issues, and the pacing issues are not redeemed by memorable horror sequences at all. This film uses like a weird zoom in, zoom out, zoom in, zoom out camera effect. It just annoyed me, man. It really irritated me. And it's used in almost every single zombie monster attack here. Oh, man. A disappointment. The attacks are unsatisfying, even as a cult film. Like, the first film works as a cult film, this doesn't work, even as a cult film. Watch The Brides of Blood instead. Now, the next film on this list, we only have 2 left tonight. The next film is A 1,000-Year-Old Fox, 1969. It's a Korean horror film, and I label this as a horror romance because it has some romantic elements. So in ancient Korea, a fox spirit possesses the wife of a warrior while the kingdom lives in fear. This is a bit on the cheesy side, but I like the classical horror elements that it uses, and it's decent fun. Now, the fox spirit in this movie, known as the gumiho, is a very popular creature in South Korea that is similar in some ways to fox spirits from China and Japan, though there are differences. Now, the gumiho is usually a 1,000-year-old fox that has learned to shift shape into a beautiful woman so it can lure men to their doom. It usually eats their livers. Now, I totally understand this because I actually love eating liver. And, some people think liver's disgusting. I like it. I mean, in fact, the last time I went to Japan, another brief Japanese vacation story, I was in Arashiyama near Kyoto. And there's a popular restaurant that serves eel, and it's awesome stuff. But on the menu, they had eel livers as an appetizer. And I ordered them, and they grilled them. It was awesome. So I totally understand the gumiho's obsession with eating liver. I don't know about human livers, but whatever. So this is kind of an interesting story in this film. It's a pretty good film. So actually, I'm almost spoiling a later surprise. But all right, I'm gonna do this here. So there's a really interesting and completely ridiculous real-life story related to this movie regarding the director, whose name is Sang-ok Shin. Yeah, I'll tell you. So in 1978, he was kidnapped by Kim Jong-il, the now deceased former leader of North Korea, and forced to make a film. Now, don't look this up, because this film that he was kidnapped and forced to make is going to appear later on in this playlist. We're going to cover it. So, basically, what happened was his wife was first kidnapped while visiting Hong Kong. He later went to find her. He got kidnapped. And the reason why I'm laughing about this is that he eventually escaped North Korea with his family and lived a fruitful life back in the South. But, man, crazy real-life story related to this guy. So, A 1,000-Year-Old Fox, which I, kind of cautiously recommend. It's not widely available, but it is streaming on YouTube without subtitles. So it's okay. It's pretty good. So we're to our last film of the 1960s, and it's a good one. The Haunted Castle from 1969, a Japanese horror film. Now, after her brother is murdered by an evil lord, a girl feeds her blood to a black cat and transforms it into a murderous ghost cat that reaps vengeance upon the Lord's family. It's good stuff. So first and foremost, this is much darker and briskly paced than some of the other J-horror flicks that we've seen from the 50s and 60s. I mean, virtually the entire film takes place at night, and the hauntings are practically non-stop. So this provides for some thrilling viewing, especially when the Chamberlain attempts to take defensive strategies against a supernatural threat. So the ghost cat's human form is surprisingly nasty and vicious. It's not like a cute ghost cat type hybrid. It's pretty nasty, vicious entity that's going for vengeance. And the execution of the horror sequences are really good. I really like them in this movie. At times, like body doubles are used. They're used to transport the ghost from one side of the screen to the other, causing panic to its victims. It's good. The atmosphere and the tone are eerie from start to finish. And I like this almost as much as Ghost Story of the Snow Witch, so I really like this one. I definitely recommend it to fans of old school horror, if you're able to find it. Again, this is one of the ones that it's not easy to find, but it is streaming on YouTube. I have it listed here in my notes, so you may be able to find it on YouTube. It may not be with subtitles, but I think it's worth watching without them. It's good stuff. So that does it for the 1960s. So we've successfully explored 43 Asian horror films, briefly, that were made before 1970. Now, what we've learned on this journey through Asian horror pre-1970 is that there were a lot of samurai-themed horror films from Japan, but there was a solid variety of different kinds of horror films from both Japan and the Philippines. I mean, you got humanoid monster films. You got artsy sensual films. You got ghost films, rape revenge films, yokai monster films, vampire films, anthologies, experimental horror films, etc. So, and we also learned that although some of these movies are difficult to find and may take some effort to track down over time, there are plenty that are also very easy to find and worth checking out. So hopefully the first 3 videos of this Asian Horror Year in Review playlist were interesting for you, because we only have 3 videos completed and we have about 40 more to go. So don't worry though, I got plenty of gas in the tank to finish this project. But as always, we'll see you next time.